Okay, folks, we have Aristo with us again today, and the title is actually from his article that he posted on Facebook, The True Globalist Agenda, and it's going to go in other places as well. But Aristo, you take it away and elaborate more on what you were writing about and what we were talking about before the camera began rolling.
Okay, Ron. Thank you very much, and it's good to be here again. First, I want to clarify, this is not my article. It's a shared, I posted it, this is somebody else's blog. So you can go to my Facebook page and, or maybe I can link it. We can link the article.
We'll do that in comments because I can't put a link in the blurb because that messes everything up.
Okay, I see.
I can only put the link for that video in. If I do it another way, it confuses the computers.
I'll send you the thing and the link, and then as soon as you put the video up, just make a comment underneath.
Yeah, I will. I can do that.
Let me see something here. The link itself is from a blog called redefininggod.com, where the God is pronounced with a big one, and there's a big letter, capital, and there's no spaces between the letters. I've just been following this guy for a while, not even following, just, reading the stuff. And it is a viewpoint that's not just his alone. And it also makes sense, because if you look at the situation, if there are good guys, the bad guys, the so-called bad guys are very bad. They're ruthless, and they would do anything to get what they want, so to speak. They are the bona fide bad guys we are taught about in movies. They used to be hidden, and most people used to think, if you were in Europe in the 80s or 70s, of course, the United States was always suspect. And of course, in the third world, it was suspect even more. By the intelligentsia, at least, So, but when I went to the United States in university, in the 80s, if you mentioned anything like that, anything about banana republics, the CIA or else, I got physically accosted by students at the university. And these were just people who lived in my dorm. I said, if you don't like it, get out. This is a God bless America and all of that. This was the Reagan era. So, if you make fun of Trump, you should have seen what it was like in the Reagan era, where all of these people who are now left used to be right. So political correctness in the Reagan era was right. Right was not alternative back then. It was mainstream, and it was very, very hardcore.
Yeah, they easily invert things back and forth. I mean, I've seen the pattern.
You have 18-year-old kids calling people hippie, hippie, whereas years before, the so-called, liberal kids who were artistic and leftist in the 60s and 70s, and back and forth, it is that. It is a back and forth, and it's almost funny the way people are triggered, with propaganda. And, it's easy to be able to look at somebody else who is subjugated by propaganda, who is influenced by propaganda, and say, oh, look at them, look at that person, they're asleep. But it's not just a matter of being asleep. You can be wide awake and still sleepwalking. So in essence, you're walking around very active, very passionate, because they are your real emotions. However, they're being misappropriated. That's what misappropriation is. Your own emotional passion, your own ideals are being hijacked and misappropriated. They're being repurposed for whatever somebody else is telling you is the truth. And then there's so much insanity about what the truth is and what isn't, that people, any logical argument, first of all, that you can use about anything can be turned against you. And it's all a matter, otherwise there would be no arguments. Otherwise, if logic was so good at convincing people, people would be convinced. With one little discussion. That's what we think. Let's have a discussion and I'll show you the truth, It doesn't work that way. And it's not just because people resist the truth and whatever. No, it's because the whole thing is a mass of confusion. It's a mess. There is no clear-cut truth in terms of what we are taught is true. You have to come and extract the truth from the factoids that are bombarding you. You have a whole bunch of facts all over the place. It's a mess. And it is your responsibility as a human being in this day and age to extract pieces of truth here and there out of it and reconstruct it on your own terms. That is not revisionist history or revisionist reality. It is you trusting your gut and your heart. And perhaps, and in that dynamic, if for some reason your gut says something doesn't feel right, you know, then it isn't right, or may not be, or it may be because there's another thing, sometimes wishful thinking. Oh, I wish reality were this way. That gets in the way, and and we mistake it for intuition. We mistake it for what our heart tells us, what our heart wants there to be. The fairy tale, which is something, an ideal. I mean, I believe in the fairy tale, as an ideal, but our heart wants that, and then anything it sees that basically gives us an instant fairy tale without any trouble, we'll grasp it. If it's too good to be true, then we want it to be true. But the thing is, sometimes we go to the other extreme, that the only thing that's true is the shitty story, the hopeless story. And that is not what I'm talking about here. Hopelessness and hopefulness are human psychological conditions. They're conditions of our heart, of our psyche. You can be hopeful in any situation. However, easy, hard, whatever, if you define a situation, draw the line, and then say hope ends here, and desolation or despair begins here, you better be careful where you draw that line. Because it's very easy for somebody to just bring you there and say, okay, here, push you just over the edge. You better be willing to say, okay, well, the line isn't that strict. It's very blurred. Of course, there's a point of no return. You're in the torture chamber, you're being flayed alive, you're being burned alive right on the stake. Of course, you might say, okay, I give up. But when you're still in the situation, when you can put two thoughts together, when your ideal still exists in your heart as an ideal, even though you may have lost faith in it, then there is hope, always. And the thing is, you have to observe around you if you want to come to a conclusion that's not going to debilitate you. Look at the motives. That's all I've been saying in these videos for the most part. What is practical for the individual who may be looking at this video? The practical thing, in my opinion, is not to start a revolution. And I'm not going to be promoting such things publicly, or even privately, as it were. Because that is up to the individual when they feel, or if they feel that the time is right, if that kind of thing happens. The point is, the previous historic process has been analyzed by psychopaths, by clever psychopaths who have hired people with high IQs who are borderline psychopathic themselves, who have modeled over and over again, using artificial intelligence in the recent years, historic developments of the history that they know, not what they're concealing, and human behavior, sociology, anthropology, all of the data that comes from all of these what they call humanist sciences, or liberal sciences. It goes to controlling us. It doesn't go into understanding humanity. Yeah, some of it does. Of course it does. We got 10% will come back to us. People will write nice books. We will be awed and amazed and admiring things, and having philosophical conversations. But the ones who fund all of this, the ones who have all of the money, they're not just humanitarians who want to further humanity. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
The ones, when you have these great foundations that belong to certain families, that the ultimate motive, why are they doing this? They're doing this for their own agenda, because they need to know about us. The liberal arts, shall we say, and humanist sciences, they research about us. You have anthropologists being sent down into third world countries or desolate, or indigenous places or wild places to find out how the local population works and thinks. Sociologists organize to see how human societies can be manipulated, how they operate. If you do this to them, you do that. There may be a situation, for example, if somebody observes, they may see, okay, something's going on here. All of a sudden you look up in the sky and you have the trails that many people are denying even exist, just proliferate, and you talk to people and they have symptoms that, common symptoms that are flu-like, dizziness, certain headaches, inflammation, lack of ability to concentrate. And then you notice all of a sudden the television comes up, and there's a consistent barrage of doctors telling you to stop eating salt, stop eating fat, eat, and other things, trying to basically, and stop smoking cigarettes all of a sudden. Whereas before, all of a sudden it stopped. Now it starts. And it's coinciding with this. Is it a coincidence? Maybe so. And at the same time, the same doctors are saying, take your vaccines. Here in Greece, you can go to the pharmacy, and they're coming, all these diseases, crazy diseases, not just for children, all the adults, elderly, young, everybody needs to go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist will put the vaccine in your bloodstream for you. All kind of vaccines. And so, and somebody comes up and says on the internet, well, it may be, and this is how the military usually works, for example, that you have chemical warfare doesn't just bomb you. There's people who work for the establishment. They need to have clear heads, and they need to present happy faces or strong faces. People come up on the media, the public media. They're always like, you don't see them busy and talking craziness and out of it. Instead, the worker themselves, the human, the average person in a society feels like crap, and they blame themselves that something's wrong with them, or that's the way it goes, or life sucks, or maybe they should just give up. All kinds of fucking, social messages are given to us, in this respect. However, if you look even deeper, you can say, okay, well, these things are being sprayed, but they're not that bad. It's called microtoxicity, I guess, in the alternative media, where you get toxified a certain way. And then, but if you mix it with, let's say, GMOs in your food, then the two bond together and you have an exponential effect. And if you mix that with vaccines, you have an even greater exponential effect. They can probably send you, all of a sudden you got some big ass disease and you're in the hospital. And then at the same time, you have, here in Greece, the president of the IMF, Lagarde, comes out on TV and says, there's too many old people in Greece. It serves our purposes for them to just die. It's time for them, old people need to, move on, so to speak. Because why? Well, the way it's working is that the pensions are sustaining the economy. And these pensions are not stolen money. They are actually, people did work hard here. And the amount of public servants was like 20%. And most of those are the same people that are in the establishment, working for the establishment, in the universities, in the media, in public offices, collecting money and taxes and this and that from the people, So they cut those in half, but this is what they're doing. They're serving the system. And the politicians who are just raking in the bucks, not by their official salary, but for whatever they're making on the side. This is all well known. It's not information that is, and it's very local. So I'm just telling you, okay, these are observations of one person. And you say, okay, the thing is that if you rationally look at the tactics and look at the strategy, I'm not going to think for you, but you can think for yourself, and you can figure out, how do I slip through the cracks? If I can learn to slip through the cracks, if I can lubricate myself and slip through the cracks, eventually I can find a place where I can do something, at least in my local dynamic. If people had the hope that they could just do something in their local dynamics, you would have a lot of local dynamics going on that could not be controlled. And these local dynamics would be strong enough to be able to come together at some point if there was a real crisis that demanded it. Because the system, in order to get us to capitulate, it's too messy to just kill us. You know the statistics that in this century, there's been more deaths than ever, in the world. And you've had something like 250 million people killed in the 1900s. And in wars and all of that. And it's a massive number. And we're talking massacres and genocides and, but 250 million people killed with a killing machine going on 24/7 in most of the world. And so how do you kill 6 billion? How do you take care of the corpses? There's no way to do that. Even Hitler fucking had massive ovens going on day and night, the burying mountains of corpses and this and that, you know, and that was just several million. So it's not that easy. The thing is, you have to learn to control them, and we have the technology to do that. Even Zbigniew Brzezinski said that. Now, the thing is, we know all this. I'm not telling you anything new. This is old information. It's also relatively old information, and even people in the alleged, right now, if you notice, the controlled alternative media has kind of changed its tune and become specialized. Things are polarized into right and left. It wasn't really that way so much. It was, but not so pronounced. You could have been leaning toward the left and still been alternative. You know, I could watch Alex Jones, for example, who is right wing, interview Roseanne Barr, who is left wing. And, you know, they would have a constructive conversation going on. There'd be a few points of disagreement, but they would agree that the enemy is the enemy, you know. And there would be other people. Now this has changed. Now everything has been strictly regulated into, okay, information is this. And so the system steps back and says, okay, let's see now, you know, society is not going to change that much. People do not want society to change. How do we know this? Well, several years ago, they propagandized this thing called the 3 days of darkness in the Western media and the internet media especially, that there was going to be 3 days of darkness. The lights would go off, and that's it.
Well, that's what they're predicting for, you know, this current weekend.
Oh, there's still, okay, yeah.
That's what, I mean, I just did a video on the predictions just a few days ago.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, 3 days of darkness. Okay, hasn't anybody, if you live in a, not even a third world, ragged, you know, decrepit country, if you even live in the Balkans, you know, you have these, you know, like Romania, there's blackouts. Yugoslavia, there's blackouts that go on for half a day, a whole day. You know, when I went to Yugoslavia in the late 70s, you know, just drove by there with my parents, they had, after midnight, it was lights out. You know, and it was every day, or sometimes like 2 hours in one day, you know, back then, I don't know, for a period. But the thing is like, so the lights go out for 3 days, you won't have electricity. Well, now how did your forefathers live then without electricity? They all were freaked out constantly and killing. They turned cannibals. I mean, in the 1800s, people had candles, they talked. They got together. That was the time when they could actually get together and really have honest discussions without electromagnetic bombardment. The last thing the system wants is to shut off the electricity, because it's going to shut off the Wi-Fi, the cell phones, and people may just realize that they don't need them all that much. They made their survival mechanism might kick in, and they just might, wean themselves off of them really fast. So, you know, that's not what the system wants. Now, these thoughts are also expressed in that blog, and that's why I happen to agree with the guy on a lot of things, and that's why I post it occasionally. Instead of writing it myself, you know, well, this guy says it, he actually posts references and shows things. And on occasion, you know, I don't agree with everything he says.
Well, I thought it was your part one, and you were going to continue. It was sort of like an introduction.
No, I mean, the guy basically picks certain scenarios. And his thing is that, oh, they want to plant a kind of false flag, a big-ass false flag, so here are danger times, and, you know, I'm not into that. My interest is basically the alternative explanation of what is going on in this New World Order thing. It's what's the plan? And the plan is, and he showed, there's a picture somewhere in some establishment, banking establishment, I don't know, where they show like a fist and a right hand going up like this. The left-hand path and the right-hand path. This is the occult symbolism that they use. This is the bad cop and the good cop. Basically, the bad guys scare the crap out of us, and we run into the arms of the good guys who then control us. The real control is, I mean, it's very incorrect of me for the alternative right crowd, and even the left crowd, especially in the United States. But somebody like Ron Paul, for example, according to this view, is also part of the establishment, the Austrian economic system. Basically, the idea is to balkanize the world at the little tiny states, you know. I mean, they used to they were pushing whatever propaganda was coming through was trying to say that Greeks were going to have a civil war. And the civil war basically, and with certain right-wing parties and left-wing parties and this and that, like they did. But once you have a civil war in a country, it is not easy all the time. I mean, some countries are different, but people who have lived within a generation of that kind of thing do not want to repeat it, you know. So the old civil war in Greece, Greeks do not want that. So you're not going to see it, and it's not viable, and nobody wants to secede unless they're coming from another country or are a minority group that's not ethnically Greek. That's the whole thing. It's politically incorrect to criticize that. But the thing is, if you're a minority group sent in from another country with the promise that if there's enough of you, you can just raise your old flag and declare independence, you know, then that's a problem, ethnically speaking. If it happened in America, you would have, you know, just somebody comes up, and even if Texas just says, hey, we want to secede, you're going to see the National Guard come in and start, you know, really cutting some heads off. So, you know, they try to spin these things a certain way. But the point is that, what was I saying? The situation, for example, now in Greece, that was a civil war type of scenario. Now it's shifted into Barcelona in Spain. And of course, they had those issues before. In all of Europe, you have groups. That's different. That's an existing ethnic group within a country. That used to be a lot of little countries like the former Yugoslavia, and they want independence because somebody has promised them a better life if they get that independence. There are certain people who really want it because they're going to be the one in charge. The more countries you have, politicians you have, you know, they may have smaller positions, but if a new world order comes in and says, okay, you guys are going to be the privileged, so you guys are motivated to get this revolution going, you know, and then the rest are just, you know, pissed off about life, or my internet connection is unstable. It says, I hope, you know, I have this, I hope you, how is the connection? Can you hear me well?
It breaks up a little bit, but not terrible. I mean, you're okay. Okay. It's 2:20. It's 22:22. I just looked at the thing at 22:22 on the timer.
So how much time do we have?
Well, we want to go 30 minutes or so.
30 minutes, okay. 10 more minutes, okay, that's cool. Well, not to ramble on about this, but as I have been doing, but there's a lot of issues, and the basic thing is that you have you have the establishment itself coming up, and I'm not talking about the American establishment. The American establishment is against Russia, it's against Putin and all of that, okay? So of course, and the American media. But when you look at the internet, I'm bombarded with memes that are pro-Putin. And that may just be Russian propaganda, but still.
Well, I'm pro-Putin.
Well, to tell you the truth, you know, under the circumstances, the situation is probably that, you know, he's going to be the more sane choice. He's going to come off as the more sane choice. But then again, you have these biblical prophecies, and it's been shown that a lot of these occultist type establishment, you know, whatever, movers and shakers, are into occult symbolism. Whether they are occultists themselves is beside the point, you know, but they believe that occult symbolism is like an archetypal key to the mass subconscious. So, you know, if you follow things a certain way, if you have the Western population still within their collective unconscious believing in biblical prophecies, for example, then you're going to try to follow biblical prophecies. People will respond to them. So you have a situation where Putin, for example, may be the savior to take us away from the bad guys, but ultimately this is what the Antichrist is supposed to be doing anyways. The Antichrist is supposed to come up and save the world and make it a better place, and then you have all the crap really happen. But the crap isn't going to be some violent whatever. It's basically going to be, okay, people, look at all these happy people with the chips in their heads. Or maybe they don't have chips. Maybe they have a contact lens, you know, or something non-invasive. Because if you have that 5G stuff, you don't need a chip in your head. If you have the internet of everything bombarding you, you know, that's it. And of course, the problem with that is how does the establishment person and their cronies, especially who move around the world, you know, have to be seen. How do they manage to not be microwaved. One solution is this. Now let's take it even further. The crazy go into La La Land as if we haven't been there, how deep the rabbit hole goes. You can take Hollywood, for example, and you notice that the actors, however sold out they may be, are still human. So if they see shit going too far, at least some of them may talk. They have to be eliminated. But that's too much trouble. That's going to be visible. Well, why don't we just take away the whole actor situation completely? Why don't we just use an artificial intelligence, and they can do that right now, and actually replace the actors with simulations? Nobody, you know, and people don't have to be tricked about it. They can easily just be convinced because it's a cool fashion. You know, you already have it in Japan. They love simulations. You know, you have people doing, there's rock concerts going on with simulations of all these, you know, dead people, and movies and stuff like that, 3D holograms. Even the alternative media has been talking about presidents being replaced by holographic simulations or just a face on TV, some Max Headroom face. There was that old TV show in the 80s, you know. So, of course, that may start happening. People just want the appearance of a society. And if in the end you end up living in a little shoebox, you know, with eating slop, as long as your audio visual is bombarded with some kind of fantasy, you'll get by until you die. In the end, people won't be needed because they're going to have artificial intelligence. What are they going to do? Stop the artificial intelligence? They can have automation, and they can use the people for whatever other reason. Basically, you know, I want immortality, so I need human bodies to experiment on. And all of this in the name of who knows what, or maybe it'll be completely denied. The fact is, in my opinion, again, that's a contradiction in terms or a paradox, but in my opinion, the fact is, the reality is that there is no crime except for organized crime. And that if it's just a bunch of bad guys doing bad things, then it's easy, you know, because then somebody rises up and says, I'm the good guy and I'm too powerful to be overthrown. But what if it's what the alternative media was saying? What if it's a very, very old thing with kings and queens when the world used to be a more or less, not the world, but the urbanized world, the so-called civilized world, was a bunch of empires. It was completely totalitarian. Maybe you had one little democracy here, or a city-state there, or something, or a guild of merchants for a little bit, or some indigenous people off to the side. But, you know, the world would lean toward a complete totalitarian system. And then they saw that it was unsustainable. In Europe, at least, after Christianity, basically, you know, well, this can last for a while, but eventually there's going to be a revolution. We got to fucking co-opt it. So they created an artificial revolution, an artificial civilization that was meant to build technology up to the point that they don't need religion anymore. So let's do away with religion. It's redundant. Well, look at the propaganda. Let's do away with all the ideologies, all the isms, everything that's kept us in a self-identified as something, for better or worse. But do away with it because we don't need it anymore, because it would only serve to make us independent, paradoxically speaking. You know, the isms may have divided us in the past, but the establishment doesn't like them now because they make us think for ourselves. We have an identity. And in the end, we don't have to fight the other guy or the other girl or whatever. We don't have to fight. We can come to terms. We can negotiate. We can, you know, relate. That's what human beings do. However, if you have technology that can just manipulate you and brainwash you and then change your genetics and all of that, there's no need for ideology. There's no need for civilization. There's no need for anything. I mean, the psychopath goes, wow, I'm God. That's the whole thing. If you look at religion, Christian religion, and you look at the whole myth of Lucifer, in my honest opinion, which is later, it's not something that was there in the Bible and in the Old Testament, you know, a fallen angel type thing. You know, what you're looking at is basically the psychopath who is in the image of their own divinity. The high priest all of a sudden wants to be God, you know, and that's what's happened. The Pope wants to be God, you know, the banker wants to be God. You know, any mover and shaker. The king, who is supposedly having divine right, now wants to be the divine, or at least called that way. So first you have to become an atheist and reject any kind of God or whatever, or identify with some upstart God that wants to take away the divine establishment or whatever, you know. and then you just go in and step in the shoes and demand everybody else. Well, they're not going to worship you, but what they will do is become puppets if you can just turn
30 minutes.
Okay. So I'm not going to give you details of saying Putin is a devil and the Chinese are devils and the BRICS nations is just the good cops and you know, you're just going to have a benign capitalistic type system or that has communist elements, something that's ideal sounding in a way, the best of both worlds. Oh, wow. But the thing is, if you have the world separated into small provinces, they are unsustainable. And so you're going to have to depend on mega corporations to feed you the slop that's going to kill you sooner than later and mutate you according to whatever experiments they want to conduct before they go off into the universe and nuke the planet to make sure nothing ever comes back to haunt them and just take over whatever. They're crazy in a way that is actually sustainable. And we know that, okay? So I mentioned these thoughts. I was going to go the route of a nice little psychological conversation because my way is actually to say, look, you need to overcome the mind control. You need to think for yourselves. You know, I'm not going to tell you what to think. But the fact remains that, you know, Ron said, okay, you mentioned this, and this was your article, so let's talk about it, you know. So I said, okay, let's do it for once. You know, let's get more political. But I really don't like it because it doesn't help. People miss the forest for the trees when you go into, they go into personalities, they go into parties, they go into left versus right, and thisism versus thatism instead of the main theme. What is going on? Your humanity is being stripped away. And I believe there is hope because we are still human and we can find out what that means in ourselves. We don't have to have anybody else telling us that. And we can chart our course and we can relate to other people. Okay. Well, thank you for bearing with me. And I know Ron is anxious to move on. This is the 2499th video, I guess?
Yep.
Okay, 2500 minus one. So let's keep going for another 2500. And thank you and namaste.
Namaste.